This issue keeps coming up again and again and again. We keep hearing that the real problem with this country is that baby boomers or some other subset of the generations were just too greedy, and that's really what's wrong with the world today. And one of our most reliable voices in puncturing such misconceptions is the economist Dean Baker. It's been a while since we've had Dean on the show, but it's always great to talk to him. For the few of you who don't know, Dean is senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He's written a number of books. His latest on the economy is Rigged. His blog, Beat the Press, takes to task our journalistic brethren for their misconceptions about economics. And he joins us now. So first of all, Dean, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Richard. I really enjoy it.
Well, thank you. And you wrote a great piece the other day, diverting class war into generational war again. And I have to tell you, even though I get the New York Times, you linked to and dissected an article by someone named Glenn Craman. And when I clicked through and read the article, within 30 seconds, I was actually screaming out loud at the kitchen table. So this is one of the worst examples of sort of generation blaming I've seen in quite a while. I guess I could set it up. Basically, Glenn Craman is saying that baby boomers have had it so good and were given such a great world by their parents, and they broke it, and now baby boomers are sitting on all this money, and we should basically give it away. That's an oversimplification, but is that a fair sort of some gist of what he's saying?
Yeah, and the biggest chunk that he and others who make this argument focus on is Social Security and Medicare. So the argument is that we, meaning baby boomers, I'm a baby boomer, I'll confess, right in the middle of the baby boom, born in 58, that we're going to get more back in our Social Security and Medicare benefits than what we paid in taxes for these programs. So therefore, that's the problem. That's why young people, when they get out of college, don't have good job prospects. They don't, they have student loan debt. They can't afford housing. Somehow he wants people to believe that. So baby boomers should feel guilty about their Social Security and Medicare and look to make it up somehow to younger generations.
Yeah, and he even in the article he says with great pride that even though he qualifies for Medicare, he's not taking it. He took a job that gave him medical insurance, and that struck me as an open attempt to shame people for collecting benefits that they've been promised all their lives. They're, at least as of today, promised to future generations. And I was quite outraged by it. But what about his by the moral arguments he was trying to make? But what about the economic arguments? How wrong is he if he's wrong?
Well, he's hugely wrong in just about every aspect. First off, baby boomers pay much more into Social Security than the generations that preceded us. Pretty much my whole working lifetime, I was paying in Social Security taxes at the current rate, 6.2% on the worker, 6.2% on the employer. My parents paid a lower rate. My grandparents paid a lower rate. So that part's not true. Are we going to live longer? Well, higher end baby boomers will. One of the very discouraging things about the last 40 years is that we've seen a growing gap in life expectancies by income. So there's been very little gain for those at the bottom half of the income distribution in terms of life expectancy. So they're not getting a particularly good deal at all. So Social Security, there's really not much of a story. Medicare, really, he has some bogus numbers here because without getting too much into the nuts and bolts here, Medicare is only partly, even by design, intended to be paid for by the Medicare tax that you and I pay as workers. Much of it is designed to be paid for by general revenue. So if you want to do an apples to apples comparison, count the taxes that we as baby boomers paid during our working lifetime into general revenue, our income tax that go to support Medicare. He doesn't count that. That's a totally bogus story. The other reason why it's incredibly bogus is you get this big imbalance that we're going to get back more in Medicare benefits than what we paid. That's because we pay too much for medical services.
Right.
That's not benefiting you and I. That benefits doctors that get paid twice as much as doctors in Germany and France. benefits the drug companies that get paid twice as much as they do in other countries, the medical equipment companies. I'm not going to feel guilty because my doctor gets more than they should, or the drug companies. That doesn't make me feel guilty. It makes me feel stupid. We should be beating up on the drug companies, the doctors, et cetera. But I'm not going to feel guilty about that.
Yeah, and I think that's a super important point. One that, as far as I can tell, he doesn't touch on at all. Also, when we talk about for example, the effects of inequality, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but my understanding has been that as more and more of the nation's income goes to the top 10% in terms of Social Security, is not, gets may not get covered because of the payroll tax cap. So if people are underpaying at all, it tends to be the very wealthy who could be considered to be underpaying for Social Security. I don't know. What do you think of that argument?
Yeah, well, that is a big part. We often hear the story, and it's true that the program faces a shortfall beginning, I think it's 233, maybe 234 in the latest projections. But in any case, not the terribly distant future. And obviously, Congress will have to do something. Otherwise, we'd see a big cut in benefits. I mean, my bet Congress will do something just because so many people are dependent on the program. My hope is, of course, that we don't see cuts in benefits. But whatever, Congress will make sure that people get at least the vast majority, if not all, of the promised benefits. But there is a shortfall, and much of that is due to this upward redistribution of income. So that if you go back to the last time there was a major revision to the program, this was done by the Greenspan Commission, 1982-83, they put the cap at a level in which just 10% of wage income was over the cap, meaning it escaped taxation. Because there's been so much upward redistribution, now it's about 18% of wage income escapes taxation. Now, that's not the full explanation for the shortfall. It's somewhat of a longer story than that. Basically, we had slower than projected wage growth. But that is a big chunk of the shortfall. So again, that's not something that I, as a baby boomer, feel a need to apologize for, except in allowing so much income to go to the high end. So again, apologies are that we let the rich get too much. I do feel bad about that. I'm still trying to fight that. But, no, I don't feel guilty about I'm not getting Social Security yet, but I won't feel guilty when I get it, which I do expect to do.
Well, and look, I'm a baby boomer too. It's shocking as that may be for some people to accept, given my youthful charm, but it is true. And the whole notion was, I think you made several great points here. But, and by the way, I have to assume he was trolling. You quote his sentence here where he says, I even wonder whether increased Medicare spending is partially responsible for the election of Donald Trump, whose margin of victory came from voters in our generation. Without that spending, might enough of us have died sooner and tipped the balance in favor of Hillary Clinton? This is the first time I've ever heard, even jokingly, the notion of mass euthanasia as an electoral tactic being advocated. What do you think? Was he just kidding?
Well, I have to assume he was kidding, but to take the substance here, yes, we know the elderly or older people disproportionately voted for Donald Trump, whereas Clinton, Democrats in general, did much better among the young. So, yeah, if we had fewer older people, then it stands to reason Clinton would have done better. But let's take the other side of that story. Why were young people turning towards Donald Trump? And, we get this endless story. Obviously, Trump is a racist. He's an anti-Semite. He's a despicable person. But one of the things that a lot of people heard was that he's going to bring back jobs. That's what he said. Now, did they take that seriously? Who knows? Again, we hear big arguments, and I'm certainly not an expert in political science, but a lot of people looked at Clinton and the Democratic Party and they associated them with losing good-paying jobs in places like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, places that voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 by fairly comfortable margins, then flipped over and voted for Hillary Clinton. Again, I'm not going to say the economics was the whole story, but it's a little hard for me to believe that economics played no role in that. So if we wanted to talk about economics being a factor in Donald Trump's election, I don't think it's that we kept old people alive with Medicare. It's that we didn't have good-paying jobs for younger people. I think that's the story, and we should be very concerned about that.
And again, we're talking with economist Dean Baker about generational war versus class war, there's another dimension of this I wanted to talk about with you, Dean, and that is the notion of savings. Now, he's a little careful, to his credit, but he's basically, I think, glossing over something here. He says, first of all, he says, people should work for free. A lot of people past the age of 65 that I know and that I know of don't have the option of working for free because they still need income. Which gets to my next point, my main point. He says, second, those of us with savings can donate to causes that benefit the young, including through our wills. Well, I would say, from what I understand, a lot of baby boomers, a lot of those that are in retirement, and a lot of those that are approaching retirement, one of the big problems is because of economic conditions over the last 30 years or whatever, they don't have savings.
That's right, and again, it's really striking to see this image that the elderly are really comfortable. Now, there's been some new research on this, and it's actually very, very interesting because it does show that people who are over 65, people in their 70s, are doing somewhat better than we had realized. This gets into some technical issues with the surveys we use, but the new data was done by people working at the Census Bureau who had access to IRS data on people's tax filings. So that's a pretty good data source as opposed to surveys. And it turns out that in surveys, people tended to underestimate their income. So when we look at this, we find out that people who are in their late 60s or 70s, they're doing somewhat better than we had thought. And that, to my view, is a great thing. But the big issue here is when we look at that and we go, why are they doing better? Overwhelmingly, the source of this, it wasn't that they had $1 million in the bank that somehow wasn't being reported. It was that they had traditional pension income. So people who had a pension from their job where they're getting paid $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month, $2,000, whatever it was, sometimes less than that, but whatever. It turns out many of them, for whatever reason, were not answering the survey question the way we would like. They weren't reporting it or they were underreporting it. So when we make the correction for that, we find out there's more money there. Now, the problem is we know those pensions are going away. There's no ambiguity about that. No one disputes that. So people in their 70s are far more likely to have a traditional defined benefit pension plan that gives you a fixed amount every month as long as you live. They're far more likely to have that than, say, someone in their 50s or 40s. So it turns out those people are not going to do very well. So it might well be the case people in their 70s are doing a little better than we thought, and that's great. But the people who are in their 50s today, early 60s, they're looking to retire in the next 10, 15, 20 years, does not look good for them. They do not have pensions, and what they have are 401k plans or IRAs, and we know they don't have much money in them. A lot of people have nothing in them, but even the people who do, the median savings is around 100,000, which again, better than zero, but you have 100,000 over a 20-year retirement, that is not going to go very far.
Well, I think that's very well said. And Dean, I just wanted to make one last point before we wrap. And I have to tell you, after I read this article, this op-ed by Glenn Cramen, I was tempted to write my own response to it just from a tonal and sort of rhetorical angle, because it seems to me the whole thing, but I want your thoughts, it is what they call a humble brag, that it's smarmy to me because the entire tone, posture, overtly, he's saying, gosh, my generation, we really let you kids down. But that what he's really saying is, look how much better I am than the average baby boomer because we all have a lot of money, but I'm actually giving back. I don't know. It's a trivial point compared to the substantive points that you're making, but any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, that is very much the tone of it. And clearly he's in the top, certainly 10%, if not top 1% of baby boomers. That's totally atypical. And just getting back to the more fundamental point, yes, I feel really bad generationally because, people coming out of school today, people in their late 20s, 30s, the labor market is really bad for them. It's not because of our Social Security and Medicare. It's because we have structures in place that allowed all the income to be redistributed upwards. That's why they're being hurt. And the other factor that, again, if we're going to talk about generational, my God, what about global warming? Baby boomers, better or worse, most of us are likely to be gone before we see the worst outcomes of that. People in their 20s, they're going to be growing up with a much worse environment, with desertification, with flooding. Areas that are today beautiful coastal areas are going to be underwater. That is something we should apologize for, not for our Social Security and Medicare.
Well, that I couldn't say it any better, so unfortunately we'll have to leave it there. But if you want to read the article the piece that Dean wrote, it's Diverting Class War into Generational War Again at CEPR.net. And Dean Baker, economist and media critic, as always, great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks a lot for having me on.